Alrighty, now that we have our movement system completed, in this video I want to go ahead and clean up our code a bit and introduce custom methods. Now, custom methods, I'm going to go ahead and open up our script here. Oftentimes, you'll find on forum boards and discussion postings, you'll find methods and functions. Just know that methods and functions, they can be interchangeably used. So in C# we call them methods, but in JavaScript or some additional programming languages, they're called functions. They're the exact same thing. So for instance, here in our script, we have a start method or function, as well as an update method or function. What we're going to do is we're going to create a modular approach, and we're going to demonstrate what object-oriented programming is, where we have our code neatly organized into sections. The reason why we want to do this is for one, readability, but also easier debugging. So what I want to do is I want to create a custom method to handle all of our movement. And the reason for that is if we have an issue down the road, we know where to look. So if we ever experience a bug in our movement code, well, we have a function dedicated to movement, and it narrows down where we have to debug our program. So also, it's just a great way to clean up our project. So right now, we have this update cluttered with all of our movement code, but what we're going to be doing later in the section is it's going to handle our shooting code, it's going to handle how we handle our power-ups, and it's going to handle all of our animation and all of our effect code. Now, our update method is our game logic loop. It's where all of our game logic essentially is going to be handled and ran. So it's never a good idea to keep it cluttered. So we're going to start by creating a custom movement method. So let's go ahead and create a new method. You can call it private void. The reason why it's going to be private is because it doesn't need to be public. Public would allow us to access it from another script. So for movement, it's specific to the player. So we're going to go ahead and say private void. We'll go ahead and call it movement. All right. And what I want to do is I want to copy everything inside of update, and I would like to paste it inside of movement. Now what we can do is we can delete everything inside of the update method, and you can call our movement method, like so. We can just initialize it. We call movement with parentheses and a semicolon. What we're doing here is we are initializing the movement method. So every frame, we're calling the movement method, and all of this code will be ran. Now, as you can see, it's a lot more cleaner, and we can now use the update method to handle more game logic without getting in the way of our movement code. There's another thing I want to clean up and demonstrate for you guys. When it comes to creating variables, the reason why I made this public is so that we can see it in the inspector. Watch what happens if I change this to private. Go ahead and save that. Now let's head back to Unity and look at our player. You'll notice that the speed variable is no longer visible. It disappears. The reason for that is because it's a private variable. And oftentimes when you're creating software or making games, you really want to take into consideration your variables and methods. Do other scripts outside of the player need to know about these variables? For instance, our movement code is specific to the player. I don't want anyone to call my movement method for my player. I also don't want any other script to have access to my player's speed. Now, what I would like to do, though, is still be able to see it in the inspector, but keep the variable private. So how can I do that? Unity allows us to create attributes, and we can use those to display certain variables in the inspector. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do something called serialization, which will allow us to keep a variable private and view it in the inspector. So to create an attribute, we use the square brackets, and we're going to go ahead and type serialize field. Now, when I save this, if there's a variable underneath it, the variable is still private. However, we can edit it now in the inspector. And the reason why you'd want to do that is because it's easier to develop in prototype. You might have a designer that wants to come in, but what's important to know is that the access modifier is private and only the player can access it. But I can change this freely in the inspector, and I can develop as normal. Going forward throughout this course, most of the variables that we create will be private because they don't need to be known by other scripts. So we'll be making use of the serialized field attribute quite a bit. When we get into shooting, and when we get into script communication, we'll probably open up our variables to be public because there might be information in other scripts that we want to access. So that wraps up our player section. In the next section, we'll be getting into shooting and moving forward. I'll see you guys in the next video.